Hey, friends, welcome. This is the third episode of the Dandelion Seed podcast. I'm so glad you're here. I'm your host, Rachel. Today, I want to share with you another piece of my story since we're kind of still getting to know each other. It's basically a follow on to episode 2. So if you have not heard part 1, which is in episode 2, you might want to give a listen as I'm going to get into the details of a really, really hard time in life. But there's lots of layers to that story. So in this installment, I want to focus on everybody's favorite subject. Drumroll, please. Forgiveness. Wait, please. Don't switch the dial. Not because I have figured out the magic formula of forgiveness, but because the Lord knows that I need to learn it in my life. So I want to tell you a little bit about my story and where I have failed at this process, and also some tools that I have found to help me progress. So for anyone new here, in episode 2, I was sharing how my husband was, let's just say, mandatorily retired from the Marine Corps. It actually happens more than you would think. But in our case, it was totally unmerited. And to be honest, it was a gross injustice on the part of what we call the Green Machine, the United States Marine Corps. So that definitely stung a little. However, looking back, I can see the Lord's hand all over it because honestly, nobody gets forced out of their career the way that we did unless God himself was wielding that crowbar. I mean, seriously, folks, it was unreal. And like I said, you can hear the gory details in episode 2, but long story short, within 2 months' time, we went from having a distinguished career, a tight-knit community, a wonderful church, a comfortable home. We were living overseas in Iwakuni, Japan. And we went from all that to being jobless, homeless, kicked out of a foreign country, washed up on American shore with no money, no car, and absolutely no idea what in the world had just hit us. I mean, it was a catastrophe, to say the least. All we had, and thank the Lord we had it, was our RV. It was sitting in storage only because nobody had bought it from us prior to our move. So we'd stuck it in storage. So we come to America and we're legally and technically homeless. And when you live full-time in an RV, you are legally homeless. But at least we did have a roof over our heads, at least for a little while. Okay, so this is a tale of forgiveness, but I want to start by contrasting two situations, just to kind of paint the picture here of sort of what our year looked like. The first one, hospitality was literally foisted upon someone, like they were forced to become hospitable, and it was the contrast of their response to it, where another situation where hospitality was offered up from that person, but it turns out it was only offered grudgingly. So I like to call it the Tale of Two Cities. We were literally in two cities, but apparently that name has already been taken, or so I've been told. So anyways, here we are, broke, destitute, washed up on American shores. You're going to hear me say that a lot. I just might have a little PTSD reliving the trauma. It's kind of like a needle on the record player. It just keeps sliding into the same grooves and playing the same song over and over again. But the Marine Corps had literally thrown our family of 6, 2 kids, a dog, a cat, onto a 20-hour flight from Japan to the United States and washed their hands of us. So we arrived, forgive me, bleary-eyed, exhausted. We were grateful for our dusty old camper where we could lay our weary heads. And after my husband finished his military checkout procedure in San Diego, which is kind of a process they have to go through in order to retire, we started our journeys from the West Coast, San Diego, back to the East Coast with our tails tucked. And a family member on the East Coast had graciously offered us some temporary housing. They knew we were on hard times. We had nowhere to go. We needed to get our feet under ourselves again, catch our breath. But if you've ever made the drive from California to Washington, D.C., you may remember that it takes many, many days to cross those thousands of miles. Well, you have to more than double that amount of time when you're towing a 44-foot camper trailer. And every morning that you wake up, you have to break camp, which means you're securely stowing all of your belongings, every cup, every plate, the cereal boxes, the dog water bowls, the camp stove, the chairs, you name it, every single thing that you've used the day prior. Then you have to roll in the slides, which are the sides of the camper. They kind of pop out. You have to hitch up the truck. You have to detach your water and your power lines. And if you have any sewer, you have to dump your sewer and rinse it, pack everything into the truck. You have to execute an entire checklist of safety items before you can be underway. And that's, of course, after you've had your breakfast, walked the dog, and stuffed the uncooperative cat into his crate. So when you are camping as you travel, it is not at all like grabbing a bag and popping into a hotel at all. Half of the time you're unhitching and setting up camp, and half the time a third of the time you're unhitching and setting up camp. A third of the time you're packing camp back up again, and a third of the time you're traveling. So you can imagine your days are broken up like such. So you're really lucky if you go 250 miles in a day. And even that is pushing it. And what you'll find is the longer distance that you drive, the later you tend to arrive at camp, the later you set up, the later you get going in the morning, and everything just kind of rolls forward. So it's a process. It's not meant to be done like you can in car travel when you're traveling with an RV. It's just a totally different pace. And along the way, you have to stop and make grocery hauls, which means you're on Google Maps trying to figure out a safe place to park the trailer. And by safe, honestly, what I really mean is a big enough parking lot where you can turn it around and not get stuck. You have to make pit stops for the dog. You're always searching Google Maps for a place that you can stop for the night. And contrary to popular belief, it is not easy to just pull over and sleep unless you want a police officer banging on your door at 2 a.m. telling you to move along. You have to find a legal place to sleep, meaning usually a campground. And most of those campgrounds do not have any last-minute reservations available. And all of them are expensive, especially when you're out of a job. And God forbid you arrived at that campground after dark, which we did many times, because backing that huge trailer into those itty-bitty tiny spaces, it's a challenge in broad daylight. Multiply that difficulty by 10,000 when you're doing it at night. And you're also trying to be nice and quiet so you don't wake up the entire campground. It's a whole ordeal. So it can be very stressful, especially when your trip cross country is unplanned and you've just lost your job and you're jet lagged from a major international move. Believe me, we were not traveling for pleasure. So it happened about a week into our journey. We had safely crossed the Mojave Desert. A whopping 127 degrees. This was in the end of April. And we were about to just buzz right past Las Vegas when bang, boom, crash, not one, but two tires on our camper literally exploded. When I say that, I mean they exploded. One tire blew up so violently that it ripped a hole in the underside of our camper, and then it popped the tire next to it. So here we are limping along the highway with two blown out tires and a ripped up camper. And we pretty much had just crossed the line into Las Vegas proper, and our camper was wrecked. And I'm sitting here like, seriously, Las Vegas? Like, really? The last place on planet Earth I ever wanted to be, let alone under these circumstances. And here we were, and I was just sitting there on the side of the road, trying hard to remember that, praise God, we had made it through the Mojave Desert safely. We did not break down on the side of the Mojave Desert Road in the middle of nowhere. So we had, in fact, reached an oasis of sort. I use that term lightly, but there were amenities there, right? We could get food, we could get water, we could get a tow truck, all the things. And my husband just so happened to have an uncle who lived in Las Vegas. And this uncle just so happened to have a really beautiful home with a guest house. They call it a casita. It's like a little mini bedroom and bathroom. So we called up Uncle Mark and Aunt Christina, whom I had never met. Bear in mind, none of us had ever met them, and asked if they could put us up for a few nights while we got our trailer fixed. But little did any of us know, it was peak RV season in the desert. I mean, really? In the summer? Like, why are people RVing in the desert in the summer? I don't know. I guess they all break down in the desert in the summer because the RV repair places had waiting lists a mile long. But we literally had nowhere to go. And like I said, no money, no job, no home. So talk about things going from bad to worse. Now we weren't just legally homeless, we were actually physically homeless in Sin City, no less. So graciously, Uncle Mark and Aunt Christina opened their home to our entire family, the dog and the cat alike. Praise the Lord. Christina is a huge animal lover. She'd been a practicing veterinarian for many years, so our dog Luna fit right in with her canine crew of 3. Even the cat settled into the casita. And of course, I was stressed beyond belief to be living under somebody else's roof whom I did not know. I've never been so fastidious in the kitchen, so quick to manage my boys' behavior. I was desperate to not feel like a burden. But of course, I was foolishly thinking we'd only be there about a week or so. Well, that week turned into 3, and then 4, and then 6. And then we finally got the call that the camper was ready to be worked on. I'm not even kidding you. And I don't know how much time had passed from that phone call until they actually repaired it, but eventually the camper was ready for pickup. This was in July. So we pretty much spent our entire summer in Las Vegas. And the worst part is, for me anyways, I couldn't fall apart about any of it, about anything, because we were living on our very best behavior underneath somebody else's roof. So everything that had happened, from losing our job and our friends and leaving Japan and our trailer crashing and what are we going to do in the future, and I'm so unhappy and I'm mad at God and all the things that were going through my head, I couldn't scream, I couldn't cry, I couldn't lay around cursing or mope in bed because I had to keep polite company. I had to outwardly appear as if I was in control, even though on the inside, I was literally like a raging tornado. I was angry, I was bitter, I was going through grief and despair, but outwardly, I was grin and bear it. And listen, our hosts made it very easy because they were gracious and wonderful and loving, and they fed us and they gave us fellowship, and it was an amazing, amazing time, considering we literally crash landed on their doorstep and didn't leave for like 2 months. Okay. So it's not that, it's just that inside we had gone through so much, and I was so grieving in my soul. And yet I just didn't feel like it was not appropriate for me to just come apart at the seams, which is what I really want to do. So looking back, I see the hand of the Lord all over our time there. Of course, it is miraculous, first of all, that he provided us a free place to live while our camper was under repair. And he provided the insurance coverage to pay for the damages. Come to find out, that's something that rarely happens in the RV world, believe me. But even more than that, it was truly an incredible time of family fellowship. Like I said, we were loved and cared for by my husband's family. I found a lovely new friend in Christina. My boys got to pass hours and hours and hours swimming in their swimming pool. We had family dinners. We learned a lot about tequila. That sounds really funny to say, but put that little note, tuck it to the side, because it's actually very, very relevant to our situation 10 years later. And I'll tell you that story in a future episode. The funny thing is, I was so angry to be stuck in Las Vegas. Las Vegas is the exact opposite of our life in Japan and our life in the military in pretty much every way. On the base in Japan, the military base, everything was orderly. Life was very traditional. It was beautiful and exotic and classy and clean in the country. And then Vegas was hot and dirty and tasteless and just chaotic. And we went from cherry blossoms and waterfalls and beautiful, beautiful ornate Japan to dusty cinder block walls and flashing neon lights. People in Japan are well dressed and they're tidy and they're unbelievably polite and kind. Las Vegas, well, you get the picture. I definitely had to cover my boys' eyes more than once while we were there. All in all, I was just mad to be there. I was mad about the job we'd lost. I was mad about the military, mad about the RV. I was scared about the future. I was mad about the unfairness of it all. And I was just downright mad at God. Even though at the same time, I could see the blessings and the provision. I could see the safe shelter and the family time and the swimming pool and all of it. I could see it, and I was grateful for it every step of the way. Not once were we ever made to feel like a burden. Not once did we feel like we'd overstayed our welcome. It was absolutely nothing but perfect hospitality, love, kindness extended to us. I cannot overemphasize how much that meant in light of the trauma we had just experienced. Truly, truly, God provided an oasis in the wilderness, literally in the desert. And not for one moment did I ever lose sight of that. But still, I questioned the why of it all. It all seemed so irrational, so out of place, nonsensical. It just felt like a waste of time. We could have been spending all of those months back on the East Coast searching for a new job. That was our destination. We could have been back with my family, people that I knew, and all the cousins and the aunts and the uncles and the support system I've known my whole life. And of course, my mom. But instead, we were just stuck in the wilderness, literally in a place where my shoes would melt to the parking lot if I did not walk fast enough. My heart was seriously grumbling in a major way. By midsummer, like I said, in July, we were finally on our way to the East Coast. I was so relieved to be able to collapse into the arms of my family because it felt safe and comfortable. I knew them, they knew me. It was everything that I desperately needed. And we were generously offered an incredible, a beautiful place to live. A little 2-bedroom guest house, gorgeously nestled in the Virginia forest. Like it was a balm to my desert parched soul to be among the trees and the greenery. Oh, it was just wonderful. We enjoyed our family fellowship. We had gatherings. I mean, they more than made up for the decade which my family had been gone from home. And we were told we could stay as long as we needed to get ourselves situated. In hindsight, I don't think anyone realized just how long a professional career shift can actually take, especially when the Lord is trying to build up your faith. So naturally, as soon as we landed, my husband set out immediately in search of a job. He was doing this in Las Vegas as well, by the way, but it's very difficult to apply for jobs on the East Coast when you're on the West Coast. So once we were in Virginia, he was knocking on every door. He was going to all these meetings, phone call after phone call. He was going to headhunters. He was going to, career lead groups. The problem is he didn't know anyone in the civilian world. We were the first people in our entire 20-year sphere of people who had retired out of the military. We were like the guinea pigs, so to speak, for all the people who would come behind us. They're all retiring now, 10 years later. We were the first ones. So we didn't have any connections into the world beyond the military. And Washington, D.C., where we were situated, is 100% about who you know, not at all what you know. So we didn't know anybody. Meanwhile, time was marching past. Summer turned into autumn. School was back in session. The leaves started to fall. Now, the next part of the story, I need to tread lightly because there are some things that transpired over the next few months which are a part of our story. I need to tell them, but they need to be handled with kid gloves. So I'm going to try not to let my spirit get riled in reliving some of this. But somewhere around Halloween, so remember we arrived in July, like mid-July. So somewhere around Halloween is when we realized we were no longer welcome in our living situation. In fact, it was around that time we realized we had never really been welcome in the first place, at least not by some of the people there. So at first, there was these under the breath comments when we would have a family gathering about like, oh, just get a job already. I would hear it. Or just he should just get a job at McDonald's. And I would like go into my soul and be like, what is this person really muttering things, about my husband? I would hear it. And I'm like, wow, okay, wow. I guess they were meant for my hearing. I don't really know. But then came the not so quiet comments about being lazy and other rather, remarks. And eventually I was out with the boys and I arrived home and I found that a temporary fence had been completely installed, fully encircling the little house we were living in so that our dog could not go on the lawn. And when the icy winter arrived, we were told we needed to park our car down the road, which was down a hill and in the woods, not on pavement because it was damaging the driveway. And so we had to park down the hill in the woods and then hike up the icy hill to our house with the groceries and whatnot. Actually, we would pull the car in, unload the groceries, and then go park it. So by the time Christmas arrived, We had been falsely accused more than once of stealing and laziness and freeloading. And the final blow was when a family member was screaming obscenities in my face, accused us of running up the utility bills, of being thieves. I mean, directly to my face. And there were other incidents as well. And just needless to say, it was shocking to the core because none of these things were true. And we weren't expecting them because we had been offered this place to stay so graciously and with such love. And we had such gratitude for it. And we were working so hard to get ourselves on our feet. It's just that the timing, it just wasn't working out. It was a very trying time for us inside the house, let alone the attacks coming from outside. Because honestly, whoever it was, the people who were treating us this way did not understand how much we were wrestling and just grieving and just frustrated and exasperated within our own souls. What that family member did not know as the attacks were growing against us is that my husband had just gotten off the veteran suicide hotline because it had been months and months and months and he could not find a job and our debt was piling up and a job at McDonald's was not going to cut it. Our little family was barely holding it together. Now, this was all happening underneath, our own roof. We weren't falling apart in public, as we're not prone to do, but our entire life had been ripped away from us. Our marriage was 100% on the rocks in a very serious way. That's a story for another day. I was having a complete crisis of faith. I shared that in episode 2, so you should definitely go and listen. Satan used perfect timing to swoop in and call us worthless and call us liars and call us thieves and call us freeloaders and call us lazy and all these different things. But Satan is the father of lies. And he wanted nothing more than to, while we were really down and my husband and I were at our lowest point in life, he wanted nothing more than to just crush and destroy us. And he was using a family member to do it. So I guess that kind of paints a picture that it didn't take a whole lot of time for the toxicity in our living situation to become palpable. We realized quickly that we were not merely unwelcome. It seemed as if we were despised. For what reason? I don't really know. I have some conjectures. We arrived there in 2016. Perhaps it was the hotly contested election year when Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump. We actually intentionally abstained from voting that year. I don't want to hear any judgment about it because we knew that we didn't want to ruffle any feathers. We didn't want to be thrown out of a living place because the way that we voted, and we know that the left wing can behave very erratically when they disagree with somebody else's opinion. And so in order to protect ourselves, we opted not to vote so that we could be innocent of any accusations of voting for anybody wrongly. It could be because, I took one of the cousins to Awana. I did not know. I could not conceive that memorizing Bible verses is actually an eviction-worthy offense. Honestly, it could be racism because a lot of the slurs under the breath were actually against Mexicans. And my husband is Hispanic. His family's Mexican. So I don't know. I mean, it could have just been pure miserliness because we hadn't paid any rent. Or maybe it really was because my dog was ruining the grass and our truck was damaging the driveway. I honestly don't know. There's a whole lot of room for speculation. What I do know is that the unwelcomeness and the anger and the hatred of us was very real and very palpable, and it was eventually made known directly to our face. What the Lord has shown me now, looking back through this unbelievably horrific time, 9 years ago, this Christmas actually, was the contrast between these two housing situations. One family, they were complete strangers to me. And they took us in. They weren't expecting us. They didn't know we were coming. In fact, we weren't even going to stop. We were going to maybe meet them for dinner from our campground and say hello, nice to meet you, and be on our way. But here we were on their doorstep. And they loved us and they fellowshiped with us. And never once did they complain about the length of our stay. And all the while, my heart was grumbling against the Lord because I was stuck in the desert. I don't know, stuck living under somebody else's roof. And that was hard. And, being stranded in Las Vegas, it wasn't my plan, right? I put that in quotes. You can't see me, but my air quotes. Not my plan. And then the situation that I had carefully planned to be a safe harbor turned out to be very toxic, even though we did have our own independent living space. So what in the world is the lesson that God had for me in all of this? Well, first and foremost, obviously, I just need to trust in him because he provides day by day. And his provision will most definitely not look like what we think it should look like. And secondly, I realize I have a lot to learn about forgiveness. Oddly enough, my husband doesn't hold any grudges about being called a thief and a liar and other derogatory slurs. He doesn't care that he was sneered and his character wrongly judged because he knows in his heart none of it's true. I, on the other hand, have struggled for 9 years to forgive the injustice, the meanness, the overt hatred. I have worked and worked at letting it go. And, just when I think I'm over it, bitterness can rise back up in me again. And I know that it's only hurting me. Because you see, a person who has zero self-awareness, a person who has no understanding of their own behavior, they have no care of their own behavior. The offender likely has given no thought to the situation and honestly probably felt very self-satisfied when we finally packed up and left. I have given countless hours and energy to reliving the trauma that it caused. So while that person has given it not a single thought, feeling self-satisfied, good riddance, I'm sitting here reliving and the trauma and just internalizing deeper and deeper and deeper. To what benefit, honestly? So here's where I want to jump a little bit sideways into some holistic healing modalities, which is a huge part of my life, and I will get into it more in future episodes. But the answer is yes, you absolutely can use physical tools to heal your spiritual and emotional state. Remember, God made us spiritual beings housed in physical bodies, okay? And he gave us many, many, many things in creation, in our physical surroundings, that we can use as tools in our healing. So one tool that really helped me, this may sound outlandish to some, especially if you have not studied the science behind aromatherapy like I have, but the thing that really, really helped me is essential oils. Now, bear with me. I have spent literally hundreds of hours researching and experimenting and studying how these aromatic oils, when they're used in a certain way, can help us rewire our mental and emotional pathways. It is not just woo, and it doesn't just sound like a great idea. It does sound like a large claim, but it's 100% true. It's backed by scientific studies. And in another episode, I will explain how it works. Just for now, know that aromatherapy is extremely effective with trauma patients, people who are unable to stop reliving certain events. There are other modalities out there that you might be more familiar with, like EMDR. You are going to come across that frequently in a therapist's office, for example. And it works much the same way. It works on the same brain circuitry as aromatherapy, as essential oils. It just rewires the neural pathway. Okay, so through what they call olfactory stimulation, which is through your sense of smell, and a series of journaling activities, which I was going through at the time, you can actually achieve substantial mental and emotional shift. But before I divert the entire podcast into the science, and believe me, I can, I love to do that, let me back up and now paint you a picture of a moment where I used God's gift of essential oils to heal myself of bitterness and unforgiveness. Okay? I'm not kidding. It actually can be done. And listen, you heard my story. You heard how bad it was. There's a whole lot of anger and bitterness there. And I just couldn't shake it. No amount of praying, no amount of scripture, no amount of knowing I needed to forgive. I couldn't. It was like that needle in the record player, right? Every time I put the needle down on the record, it would just and just go into that same groove and play it over and over and over again, that same scenario in my head. That's what PTSD is. You just can't stop reliving it, right? So in this case, I'm using the essential oils, and I was using cedarwood oil. And I use cedarwood for many different things, and I use it for many reasons. But in particular, in this situation, cedarwood is long associated with wisdom and clear thinking. In fact, in the Bible, King David lined his entire throne room with the wood of cedar or cedarwood because of the fragrance. You know, that's why we have cedar chests, and it keeps the moths at bay, but it also highly, highly oxygenates the brain. We find this out thousands of years after King David, of course. But somehow he knew it intuitively. And it also, because it oxygenates the brain, it helps you become more attuned with your spiritual nature. And at the same time, it stimulates your cognitive acuity, right? So it's sharpening your mind because you're getting all this extra oxygen in the brain. And then it's really helping to make you, in a way, higher minded, more connected with the spiritual side of yourself. So I had a bottle of cedarwood. Literally, I'm holding it up to my nose. It was pretty much touching. I probably had it all over my nose, honestly. And I was working through a journaling exercise in an emotional release class that I was taking. Because listen, I was working hard to try to do this forgiveness stuff and let go of my negative, toxic emotions. And I don't know. I'm sure there's people who can just forgive on a whim. I'm not one of those. I had to work really hard. I needed people to help me. I needed tools. So I would deeply inhale from this bottle of cedarwood, and then I would write. And then when I needed to take another breath, I would inhale again, and then I would write. And I did this over and over. Inhale, write. Inhale, write. And suddenly, very clearly, the Lord said to me, now write, I forgive, and then fill in the blank with that person's name. That person who was horrible, horrible to us. It was like a command. It entered my mind from somewhere outside of myself. And I knew it was God. Mostly because I knew he was telling me what to do, what was right. And when what is right and what is true goes in and you have a spirit of truth in you, it resonates in your being. And I knew that when that voice said, now write to forgive this person while you're smelling this oil, I knew that's what I was supposed to do. And the truth and the wisdom in that command resonated. But man, oh man, I mean, the very instant, the microsecond that thought entered my mind, every cell and fiber of my being rose up against it. My emotional self was furiously resisting those words. Like anger rose up in me, and it was powerful. I mean, it was so much so, I felt like even though I needed to obey this command that just seemed to come straight from the Lord, I could not bring myself to do it. So my brain would say, do it. And my heart and my hand would be like, no. I'm not kidding you when I tell you, I sat there for a while. Okay, so you know those illustrations of a person, you know, maybe a cartoon sitting there with, they got the little devil sitting on one shoulder and the little angel sitting on the other. And both characters are at once telling that person what to do, and they're simultaneously arguing with each other, right? And I was that person. I'm not kidding you. I was sitting there. There was like two voices. And I was listening to them fight. One voice would say, you can't forgive that person. What a terrible person they are. And then the other voice said, write it. I forgive so-and-so. And then the other voice, so-and-so doesn't deserve your forgiveness. And then write it. No, do it. I'm not kidding you. It went back and forth and back and forth. And it was literally like an audible wrestling of like, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Is what I was experiencing. And I honestly felt in that moment, I almost felt like an observer, which is so weird. And I know it sounds crazy, but that's how it felt. So in me, I was angry. I was tense. I was mad. I didn't want to do it. In a spirit of unwilling obedience. Okay. I took a long, deep inhale of that cedarwood. And I was mad, and I grudgingly, unwillingly wrote the words. I mean, I have this page now. You should see the chicken scratch, like the angry chicken scratch. I, in capital letters, forgive. And then I wrote that person's name. But it took everything I had to make myself do it. And would you believe, I'm not kidding, in that exact precise moment when I wrote that person's name, there was a shift inside me. We're talking a spiritual shift I could physically feel. It was like a clunk. It was like a giant pile of rocks had just been shoveled away by like a backhoe or something. A heaviness just came off of me. I wouldn't be surprised if somewhere in the heavenly realm, in the spiritual world, there was an audible clunk as 10,000 pounds of bitterness and hatred just fell to the earth. I mean, I could feel it. I was lighter. I was free. It was amazing. I'm telling you this because I didn't think it was ever, ever, ever possible. Now, by no means did I start loving that person or even think of them fondly. Okay. All I had done was dropped 10,000 pounds of rocks of bitterness and anger and hatred. Listen, that person has a lot of qualities that are not good for me to be around. Might be fine for other people, not good for me. But I had freed myself from the bondage, and that was the important part. Side note, I have also learned in the 5 years since that liberating moment that over time you can actually pick the bitterness back up if you're not careful or intentional. Oh, I don't mean you pick up all 10,000 pounds at once. It's more like you could pick up a few pebbles over here and a little bigger rock over there. The truth is, the more I relay the story, the more I make negative comments, or if I dwell on my grievances, the more weight I pick back up. So as I've gathered up some rocks again, I realize I still have more work to do. And perhaps, in fact, likely, that's why God tells us to pray for our enemies. I will confess, I have not done that. Not very much, a couple of times maybe. And so I'm derelict in my duties. But praying for our enemies keeps our eyes focused heavenward. That prevents us from staring at the dirt and gathering up more pebbles, if that makes any sense. It's really, we're doing it for us. And sure, prayer does wonders and it might change that person's heart. It might not. That person may go on the rest of their lives being exactly as horrible as they always were, but it liberates us, right? And it softens our heart towards them. So they say, I've heard it said anyways, the opposite of love is not hate. It's actually indifference. I don't know if that's true or not, but it makes a good bit of sense to me. I mean, there's about 7 billion people here on planet Earth that I'm pretty much indifferent to. I don't hate them by any stretch, but neither do I love them. I'm not God. On the other hand, indifference feels incredibly liberating as opposed to anger or hatred. Anger and bitterness and hatred, they just needlessly consume your energy. And that's energy that can be used in any direction other than unforgiveness, right? Let's harness it, use it productively. So in that aspect, my husband's very wise. He does not cling to offense because the offender was wrong. Too bad for him. He's wrong about that. And he moves on. The accusations and slanders and judgments, they simply weren't true. So therefore, my husband just discarded them like water off a duck. It just slid right off. It's incredible. It's been much, much more of a process for me because I've internalized those insults and the grievances and the unfairness. But I know God is doing a good work. I know it because the more rocks I drop, the more joy I feel. He truly does lighten our burdens when we take his yoke upon ourselves. For his yoke is easy and his burden is light. If we just walk in obedience, and like I said, I was in grudging obedience, but I did the work he told me to do, and 10,000 pounds dropped off. It's much more than just a metaphor. And even more important is to keep our eyes fixed on God rather than man. All the while that we were going through all of our trials, the Lord was looking down and he was providing for us. He was holding us in his right hand. We were never for want. Even though tensions ran high, we still had a roof over our heads. We always had food to eat. And we even still had family time and fellowship. I would have weathered the storm much more gracefully if I had focused on all the blessings rather than on the grievances. When you have so many things to be thankful for, there's not a lot of room left for unforgiveness. So if you think about it, unforgiveness is really kind of just a another form of ingratitude. And that leads me to the thought that perhaps what I really need to do is to write that person I've forgiven a thank you letter. Well, thanks everybody for spending time with me. I know it ran a little long. I appreciate you being here for this episode of the Dandelion Seed podcast. I hope you will join us next time as we continue to unfold more of this crazy story. There's a lot more of it, layers and layers. There's always something good that God wants us to learn. So I appreciate you hanging with me, and I'll talk to you next time.